Emma Collins had always prided herself on being a devoted wife. She and Daniel had been together for 10 years, weathering life's ups and downs, sharing laughter, arguments, and quiet moments that, at least in her mind, solidified their bond. Their love story wasn't a whirlwind romance. It had been built over years of trust and companionship. That's why, as she turned the key in the front door of their suburban home that evening, she had no reason to suspect that her entire world was about to shatter. She wasn't supposed to be home that night. Her business trip had been scheduled to last 3 more days, but the last meeting had been canceled, allowing her to return early. Excited to surprise Daniel, she had even picked up his favorite bottle of whiskey from duty-free. She imagined walking in, seeing the look of delighted surprise on his face, and maybe spending a quiet evening together, just the two of them. But as soon as she stepped inside, something felt wrong. The house was too quiet, yet at the same time there was an unfamiliar atmosphere. A faint hint of perfume, sweet and floral, nothing like her own subtle vanilla scent, lingered in the air. The living room lights were on, and voices drifted from inside. At first she thought Daniel had invited a friend over, but the soft, feminine laughter that followed made her stomach twist. Emma's heart pounded as she took slow, cautious steps toward the living room. As she turned the corner, the sight before her made her freeze. Daniel was sprawled casually on the couch, his arm draped over another woman. Sophie. Emma recognized her instantly. She wasn't just anyone. She had once been Emma's friend. They had gone to college together, lost touch, and then reconnected briefly at a party a year ago. Sophie had been charming, asking about Emma's life with what now seemed like feigned interest, and here she was now, curled up against Emma's husband as if she belonged there. It took a moment for Daniel to notice Emma standing there. When he finally looked up, there was no guilt in his expression, no shock, no panic. Just an arrogant smirk that sent a chill down her spine. Sophie didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. Instead, she shifted slightly, making no effort to move away from him. "You're early," Daniel said, his tone casual, almost amused. Emma felt like the air had been knocked from her lungs. "What is this?" Her voice came out quieter than she intended, but she refused to let it shake. Sophie chuckled lightly, exchanging a glance with Daniel before looking back at Emma. "I think it's pretty obvious." Emma clenched her fists. "In my house?" Daniel sighed and sat up straighter, finally moving his arm from around Sophie. "About that." He ran a hand through his hair as if preparing for a serious conversation, but the smugness in his eyes betrayed him. "I think it's time you found somewhere else to stay." Emma blinked. "Excuse me?" Sophie smirked. "Daniel and I have been together for a while now. We figured it's best if you move on." A sharp ringing filled Emma's ears. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. She had seen stories like this in movies, heard about betrayals in gossip circles, but never in a million years did she think she would be the woman standing in the doorway, being told to leave her own home. Her home. The house she had helped decorate, where she had cooked countless dinners, where she and Daniel had celebrated anniversaries, birthdays, holidays, the place where she had poured her love, her time, her life. "Daniel," she said, her voice steadier now, her anger rising to combat the shock. "This is my home too. You don't get to just kick me out." Daniel exhaled, as if she was being unreasonable. "Technically, it's in my name. I bought it before we got married." Oh, Emma felt her nails digging into her palms. "We've been paying the mortgage together for years." Sophie let out a dramatic sigh. "Look, Emma, let's not make this difficult. You're smart. You had to see this coming." Emma turned her glare to Sophie. "I don't recall inviting you into my marriage." Sophie only smirked, looking utterly at ease, as if she had already won. And maybe, in her mind, she had. Emma took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. She refused to break down in front of them. She had always imagined that if Daniel ever cheated, he would at least have the decency to be ashamed, to beg for forgiveness, to act as though he had made a mistake. Instead, he looked at her like she was an inconvenience, like she was the one ruining their moment. Something inside her snapped. "You know what?" she said, her voice eerily calm. "You want me gone, fine. But don't think for a second this is over." Danielle chuckled. Emma, don't be dramatic. It's better this way. You'll be happier in the long run. Her entire body tensed at his condescension. He had already moved on. He had probably been planning this for months, waiting for the right moment to shove her out of his life. And Sophie, her former friend, was sitting there watching with amusement, reveling in Emma's humiliation. Emma inhaled deeply, gripping the strap of her bag. She wasn't going to cry. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Without another word, she turned on her heel and walked toward the door. But as she reached it, she stopped. Looking over her shoulder, she met Daniel's eyes. "You'll regret this," she said simply. Daniel's smirk faltered, just for a second. Then Emma stepped out into the night, her mind already racing. She didn't know exactly what she was going to do next, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going down without a fight. Emma sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The humiliation burned in her chest, her mind replaying the scene over and over. Daniel and Sophie sitting there so smugly, as if they had every right to erase her from her own life. The way he had looked at her, not with guilt, not even with anger, but with indifference. Like she was just a temporary inconvenience. Like he had already moved on and she was the one who needed to catch up. For the first few minutes, she simply sat there, her breathing uneven, staring at the house she had once considered her safe haven. The windows glowed warmly against the evening sky, but now, instead of feeling like home, it felt foreign, violated. It was no longer hers. Or at least, that's what Daniel wanted her to believe. She refused to let that happen. With a deep breath, Emma pulled out her phone and scrolled to the contact she needed. "Hey, Claire," she said when her best friend picked up. "Can I crash at your place for a while?" Claire didn't ask any questions. At least, not yet. She simply told Emma to come over. As Emma drove through the city, her mind started shifting from shock to something sharper, more focused. She couldn't change what had happened, but she could fight back. She wasn't just going to roll over and let Daniel and Sophie push her out of her own life. By the time she reached Claire's apartment, the tears she had been holding back finally started to spill. Claire took one look at her and pulled her into a hug. "What happened?" Claire asked gently, guiding her inside. Emma took a shaky breath. "Daniel, Her voice caught, but she forced herself to continue. "He's been seeing Sophie, and tonight they told me to leave, like I was some stranger who had overstayed her welcome." Claire's eyes darkened. "That absolute bastard." She led Emma to the couch and handed her a glass of water. "Did he at least try to explain himself?" Emma let out a bitter laugh. "No, he just smirked, like he had already won." Claire shook her head in disbelief. "And Sophie? Jesus, what kind of person does that?" "The kind who enjoys watching someone else suffer," Emma muttered. Claire exhaled sharply. "You're not letting them get away with this, right?" Emma straightened. "Not a chance." The next morning, after a night of restless sleep, Emma found herself sitting in a lawyer's office. The firm had been recommended by a colleague, and she hoped they could help her make sense of what her next steps should be. The lawyer, an older woman named Margaret Lawson, listened carefully as Emma recounted everything: her marriage, the house, the betrayal. "Legally speaking, Daniel does own the house," Margaret said. "If he purchased it before your marriage and never put your name on the deed, he has the primary claim." Emma's stomach sank. "So he really can just kick me out?" Margaret held up a hand. "Not so fast. You've been married for 10 years. If you contributed to mortgage payments, maintenance, or renovations, we can argue that you have a financial interest in the property." Hope flickered in Emma's chest. "So I have a case?" "You definitely have options," Margaret confirmed. "But we need proof. Bank statements, emails, anything that shows you contributed financially." Emma nodded. That, at least, she could do. Over the next few days, she gathered everything she could find. Bank statements showing joint expenses, receipts for furniture she had bought, emails where she and Daniel had discussed home repairs. Every document, every piece of evidence she could use to prove that she had built that life with him. Meanwhile, Daniel and Sophie made no effort to be discreet. Mutual friends started reaching out, some offering sympathy, others clearly siding with Daniel. Social media was suddenly filled with photos of them together, at restaurants, at parties, even in her living room, as if she had never existed. One particularly cruel moment came when Sophie posted a picture of herself drinking wine on Emma's balcony with the caption, "Home sweet home." Claire was furious. "She's doing this on purpose." "I know," Emma said, her voice tight, "but let her enjoy it while she can." Because Emma wasn't just fighting for her home, she was fighting for justice. And she wasn't going to stop until she won. Emma sat at Claire's kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her, scrolling through bank statements and emails. The past week had been a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, grief, determination. But now, she had channeled all of it into a singular purpose, unraveling the truth. Daniel had thought he could push her aside without consequences, but he had underestimated her. She wasn't just going to take back what was hers, she was going to expose him for the fraud he truly was. She took a sip of coffee, trying to stay focused. The financial records were a mess, but she had already found some inconsistencies. There were large withdrawals from their joint savings account that she hadn't authorized. Money had been transferred to accounts she didn't recognize, and then there were the business expenses. And she realized that Daniel had always brushed off as investments. Now, looking at them with fresh eyes, she realized they had nothing to do with his company at all. "Find anything?" Claire asked, leaning over her shoulder. Emma sighed, rubbing her temples. "A lot of things, none of them good." She clicked on another statement and pointed to a series of transactions. "Look at this. He transferred money out of our joint account. Thousands of dollars. Right around the time he started seeing Sophie." Claire whistled. "So, not only did he cheat on you, but he used your money to fund it?" "Pretty much." Emma's jaw clenched. "And that's just the start." Claire pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. "Okay, let's go over this logically. What exactly are we dealing with here?" Emma took a deep breath. "First, there's the house. Legally, he owns it, but I can prove I contributed financially. That gives me a claim." "Right." "Second, there's the money he took from our joint account. I need to figure out where it all went." "And third?" Emma hesitated. "Third, I need to know what else he's hiding." Claire raised an eyebrow. "You think there's more?" "I know there's more." Emma had been married to Daniel long enough to recognize when he was lying. And if he had gone to such lengths to blindside her with this betrayal, there had to be other secrets lurking beneath the surface. She spent the next few hours piecing together everything she had found. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became. Daniel wasn't just cruel, he was reckless. It wasn't just personal expenses disguised as business costs. It was loans she had never known about. Emma's heart pounded as she read through the documents. Daniel had borrowed a significant amount of money over the past 2 years, likely to maintain the illusion of success. He had always acted like his business was thriving, but now she could see the truth. He was drowning in debt. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen. "This is bad." Claire frowned. "How bad?" "If he defaults on these loans, he could lose everything. The house, his business, everything he was so smug about keeping from me." A slow realization dawned on Claire's face. "So you're saying, if we play this right, you could take more than just your share of the house?" Emma nodded. "I could take him down completely." That night she met with Margaret again, laying out everything she had found. The lawyer listened intently, her expression growing more serious by the minute. "This changes things," Margaret said finally. "If he used marital assets to fund personal expenses without your knowledge, we can argue financial misconduct. That would give you a much stronger case in the divorce." Emma exhaled slowly. "So I can fight for more than just what I put into the house?" Margaret nodded. "You can fight for a significant settlement, maybe even force the sale of the house if he can't afford to buy you out." For the first time since this nightmare had begun, Emma felt something close to victory. Daniel had thought he could discard her and move on without consequences. He had thought she would simply disappear. He was wrong. But Emma wasn't just going to rely on legal battles. She wanted the truth to come out. She started subtly reaching out to mutual friends, carefully steering conversations toward Daniel's financial situation. She didn't reveal everything, just enough to plant seeds of doubt. Slowly, she saw the shift. The people who had been so quick to take Daniel's side began asking questions. Then, one evening, she got a text from an unknown number. "I think you should know something about Daniel. Meet me tomorrow at the coffee shop on 5th to 3 p.m. Her heart pounded. Who was this? And what did they know? The next day, she arrived at the coffee shop early, scanning the room nervously. Then, a man she vaguely recognized approached her table. "Emma?" She nodded. "Do I know you?" He hesitated. "I work with Daniel, or I did." He sat down, glancing around as if making sure no one was listening. "I heard what happened, and I think you should know. Daniel's in way more trouble than you realize." Emma's stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" He exhaled sharply. "The investors in his company? They're getting impatient. He promised them returns he can't deliver. If he doesn't come up with a lot of money fast, things are going to get ugly." Emma's blood ran cold. This was worse than she thought. If Daniel was in deep with investors, it meant legal trouble wasn't just a possibility, it was inevitable. The man leaned in. "I don't know what your plans are, but if you're smart, you'll make your move before everything collapses." Emma's mind raced. She had come here hoping to find leverage. Instead, she had found something even better: Daniel's impending downfall. And now she just had to be ready when it happened. Emma sat in the courtroom, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her heart pounding as she waited for the judge's final ruling. It had been months since that night when Daniel and Sophie had ordered her out of her own home. Months of relentless legal battles, quiet strategy, and carefully executed revenge. And now, she was finally about to see the results of all her efforts. She stole a glance across the room. Daniel sat with his lawyer, his once confident expression replaced with something closer to exhaustion. His suit, which used to be pristine, looked slightly wrinkled. There were dark circles under his eyes. Sophie wasn't beside him this time. She had stopped showing up to the hearings weeks ago, likely realizing that Daniel's downfall was not going to be as glamorous as she had imagined. Emma's lawyer, Margaret, gave her a reassuring nod as the judge shuffled through the documents one last time. Then, in a calm, authoritative voice, he began delivering the verdict. The court finds that the petitioner, Emma Collins, has sufficiently demonstrated financial contributions to the marital home, despite the deed being solely in the respondent's name. As such, she is entitled to a portion of the property's value. Emma exhaled slowly, gripping the arm of her chair. This was it. Furthermore, the judge continued, evidence has been presented regarding the respondent's financial misconduct, including unauthorized use of joint assets for personal expenses. Given these findings, the court orders that the respondent compensate the petitioner for her share in the property. If the respondent is unable to do so within the designated timeframe, the property shall be sold, with proceeds distributed accordingly. A cold, heavy silence filled the room. Emma turned her head just enough to see Daniel's jaw tighten. She knew what he was thinking. He couldn't afford to pay her out. The house would have to be sold, and with the amount of debt he was in, he wouldn't walk away with much. It was over for him. The judge finished reading the ruling, issued the final court orders, and dismissed the case. Emma sat there for a moment, barely registering the words, until Margaret leaned in and whispered, "You won." It took another second for it to fully sink in. She had won. As she gathered her things, she caught Daniel staring at her from across the courtroom. The smirk he had worn the night he betrayed her was long gone. Instead, his face was pale, his expression unreadable. Maybe he had finally realized that he had underestimated her. Maybe he had finally grasped the full weight of his mistakes. She didn't smile, didn't smirk back. She just held his gaze for a moment longer before turning away. Outside the courthouse, Claire was waiting for her, bouncing on her heels. As soon as Emma stepped out, Claire rushed forward. "Tell me that was the look of a man who just lost everything," she said eagerly. Emma let out a breath, a real one this time. Free. Unburdened. It was... Claire grinned. God, I wish I had been in there to see it. Emma smiled, feeling the warmth of the moment settle in. The past few months had been a battle, but now she was free. She had her share of the house, she had financial security, and most importantly, she had taken back control of her life. Claire linked arms with her. So, what's next? Emma looked out at the city, at the possibilities stretching out in front of her. A fresh start, she said simply. And this time, it was on her terms.